Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Sprizzi. I'm the director of programming for the Mammoth Film Festival, and I'm so pleased to be here with the director of Residue, Merawi Gerima, who's on a layover in Ireland, and it's the middle of the night, and I'm so touched that you would go to the trouble of talking to us. It's really wonderful to have you with us.
Hey,
Uh,
my pleasure. My
yeah,
pleasure.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's really amazing to watch Residue again. Can you tell us, has your perspective changed on Residue after everything that's happened over the summer?
Yeah, I think it's been, it's finding new context, right before my very eyes. None of this, of course, was even, you know, uh this kind of worldwide uprising and, kind of revolutionary moment wasn't even a thing in my mind, in the time that we were making it. It felt very insular and, very kind of contained within, this kind of DC community. But with the way things have popped off now, it's just so many different avenues and channels have opened up that just seem like Residue can fit into this kind of political moment, this social moment, um, in a really radical way. And I'm excited to see how people take it up. Yeah,
Yeah,
really.
yeah. I should say it's premiering tomorrow on Netflix. It was picked up by Array, Ava DuVernay's company, and so it's already it's gonna hit a wide audience. Um, I guess I'd love to backtrack a little bit to. I mean, the film it does so much heart to it, but it's also just the craft of the editing and sound design in particular is really unique. And I wonder what your intentions, your inspirations, and your whole trajectory was around finding that particular aesthetic.
Yeah, first I'll say that, as always, I have to contextualize my work within the work of my parents. They're both incredible Black independent filmmakers, who come out of the so-called, LA Rebellion, this generation of Black filmmakers in the 60s, 70s, and 80s who were fighting basically tooth and nail to tell, unmitigated Black stories, in a totally racist, film industry environment. And they really crafted this, the incredible techniques of creating high production value with no money, out of pure necessity. And I think stylistically they share, similar elements. If you look across the board from Charles Burnett to, Haile Gerima, my father, to, Julie Dash, to Larry Clark and Billy Woodbury, there's a through line, that flows. And I think that I inherit and have inherited that in a big way because I kind of grew up around, them and their contemporaries. Um, and it's at the base informed by, the economic reality, like I said, of having to make a film, vast and epic stories, with no money. And so, the editing style comes out of that, it comes out of the shooting style, which comes out of even to the writing style, knowing that I wouldn't have money for a police car, and how do I cover the scene, without a uniform or police officer, So of course we hear him off screen, and there's a scene with the drive-bys, shooting, and there's no money for a car and guns and all that, and so and actually, that was an incredible opportunity to stick closer to the way I remember it, which, my experience, I was in the car surrounded by my siblings anyway, and I couldn't see anything out the window. I just remember hearing, the way things were happening. And so I think that like it was an incredible opportunity to be more true to the way, to my own, memories of these things, and find these kind of elegant solutions. Um, and the sound design, if you once again watch any of my parents' films, especially, my father's early films, it'll make sense. It'll make a lot more sense, or really contextualize itself. And I studied my parents deeply, very deeply. There was a moment, I mean, I got this technique actually from one of my father's students. He gave me the audio to my dad, one of my dad's films, and I just kind of just listened to the sound, the sound design itself, without the image, and like that was the kind of level that I'm studying them at, and so it's very closely tied in.
Cool. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about you have these a lot of really very dramatic, very violent scenes that you were able to capture in a way that really felt almost documentary, and which seemed, for me as a programmer, like I see how difficult that is for filmmakers to capture something that feels that raw and authentic. How did you go about that?
I mean, a lot of those things are documentary footage. The man being arrested by 5 cops, in this, kind of concussion sequence. That happened right outside my mother's house. Uh, the that one really cool shot of the guy chasing the other guy with the firecracker down the street. That happened right outside of our car. And that was the importance of really kind of um, incorporating all this other footage, because all this cell phone footage and DSLR footage, because it allowed us to continue filming outside of just the production schedule with the main cinema camera that we were lucky enough to get kind of donated to the project. But it allowed us to shoot any and everything and not be inhibited by the fact that it wasn't crisp, ridiculous high level footage. And so it was important in this film to break that barrier early on in people's minds that this is not going to be crispy footage throughout. And I think early on you get used to it, after a while. But it's.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Um, I think another thing that really stood out to me is just the way white people are portrayed in the film, and it's really interesting to see the white people portrayed as the other, and there's like a real playfulness to it as well. So, how did you sort of conceptualize that?
Well, first, yeah, there's a playfulness, but there's also direct kind of you know anger, kind of locked into the way that it was important for me to force them to the edges of the frame in a story, or in a place in a city where they take up so much space. But the original, originally we were forced into that way of shooting because we couldn't get enough white people to come act in the film. It's funny because they're gentrifying the hell out of the city, but it was hard to get them to come act in, and play out their, what I mean, their crimes, so to speak. But the interesting part is we cast often, online and stuff like that. We put out calls, for characters to fill these roles, and we get a lot of people, a lot of white folks would show interest. But once we sent like the location of where we were filming, or kind of details about the story, literally it was next to impossible to get. I'm telling you, over 2 summers, next to impossible to get white folks to show up. And so we used, some of our crew members who were white. They acted in the film, and the few white people we had access to we had to use multiple roles. That's so basically we couldn't show their faces. And that's kind of where it came out of. But then we started to really take advantage of that opportunity, which presented itself, to really kind of control the narrative in a new way. Anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Um, well, can you tell us a little bit more about the writing? It seems like the structure of this film feels very almost maybe not like a classic 3 act structure by any means, but it has this amazing flow to it. How did you conceptualize that, or did it come spontaneously, or was it thought out?
Well, first, so my dad talks about, kind of narrative logic that we all have. Everybody having a unique way of seeing the world and a unique way of telling stories. And, every story really being born in your mind with its own inherent way, its own inherent structure. And I think that, this is, once again, the kind of storytelling school I come out of. So in the writing of it, I was really just kind of getting down scenes, you know what I mean, or getting down moments that I remembered or that I was deeply impacted by in my childhood or adolescence. And I had no particular order, in the way that I was getting these out. It was really just an order of what needed to come out at that moment. And then I kind of went back through, over the next year and just kind of assembled and reassembled, the script in a way that trying to draw connections between these scenes or these moments. But I also have to say that the script was, in many ways, it was the first draft of the script, and usually you try to get a rewrite in or a couple before you shoot. But we ended up shooting the first draft of the script, which brought many problems, as you can imagine. We didn't have an ending, for example. That's why we came back the second summer in 2018 to finish shooting. But also, it presented many opportunities for freedom, because we weren't locked down into a perfected story, that I was kind of married to. We were ready to cut any and everything, for the sake of getting this thing shot in time. And we were free to explore and author on the fly and pursue different things that were happening in the city at that moment, kind of within the confines of our, our productive capacity. And it, again, is also a blessing in many ways that we didn't have a lot of money, because we didn't have a whole train of people following, that we had to account for before we did anything with the camera. And I've seen these massive productions, and sometimes I feel bad for for folks who are really trying to do something, but are just kind of reined in by all the money that they brought with them.
Yeah.
I don't think
Cool.
this film could have been made under any other conditions. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Makes sense. We have a couple audience questions. First question is, what steps do you think need to be taken to get more equality in the industry and society? It's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had the answer. I think there's certainly people more qualified than me in this, but I'll say that I, I I I think it's important. For example, um, for me at least, it has been important to pursue my own stories without regard for the industry at all. And I just so happened to find myself at the doorstep of Netflix, which is cool. But I think for me, the most important thing was getting the story out, in order to salvage the remains of my community as it stands today. And I think that that's kind of at the heart of the issue is the industry is kind of primed and ready to operate a certain way. It's primed and ready to churn out white stories and create kind of cherry create opportunities for white people easily, and it's very difficult to rearrange it another direction. But I think that there's so many stories that have yet to be told in other communities and Black communities. For example, from my perspective, that's kind of why the character of Delante is so important, because he's the first person, who filmmakers should be confronted with when they go in to extract these stories from these communities, to say, who are you and what are your intentions? You know what I mean? To not trust Hollywood when they come in with cameras, because, Black pain is so easily exploitable. They always kind of come to us first. But to say, no, we actually don't trust you. We don't exactly need you either, because we have the capability to tell our own stories. And I think that, whether the industry comes along or not doesn't matter if communities themselves generate their own mouthpieces and abilities to tell their own stories for themselves. And I think that would be the truly revolutionary thing, which would bring around everybody else, at a certain point anyway.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Great to hear you say that. So another question from the audience: what was your process for casting the actors?
The actors were all mostly family and friends, you know what I mean? Delante, played again by Dennis Lindsay. We went to school together. That was my college roommate. I called him as I was driving from LA to DC. All the LA to DC footage, by the way, was just shot by us, in the car, me and my friend Craig, as we were driving. That's like his hand. It was a random shot that ended up in the film and stuff. Anyway, as we were driving to DC, we called him. I was like, yo, you want to be in this movie? And like, no questions asked. First, he was like, you're a wild dude, you know what I'm saying? Just because he knows me just to be, random as hell. But he was like, man, anything you want, I'm in there. And that's kind of how the casting went. It was just, family and friends who believed in this kind of story. And I mean, there's a woman, Miss Amira, who she just heard one line about it, a film about DC, and she was in. She said, she was like, I have several kids, they're in, you know what I mean? They don't know it yet, but they're in. She was showing me photos, and they're in the film. Young Dion and young Mike, those are her sons. And her daughter, there's a couple shots of her daughter. But, that's the way we were doing it. And when we couldn't find people that way, we were grabbing people off the street, literally. My parents have a bookstore in Washington, D.C., community center. And like people who come in there, if they had the right look or whatever, you know what I mean, or they're the right age, we were grabbing them out of the bookstore or off the street and just, kind of asking them. The two guys in the one with the mask, they're heckling Jay and his girlfriend at the time, Blue, in that construction area scene. The dudes that we had lined up for that scene didn't show. These dudes were just walking by. One of them had a mask on, and we was like, "Yo, y'all want to be in a movie?" They were like, "Hell yeah!" And they're in the movie, and they killed it. We just got lucky, just back to back, just like that. People just kind of, volunteering and killing it.
Nice, nice. So another question: where can we find your parents' films?
So my parents, they self-distribute. We self-distribute our films, or their films. So you can find most of them at sankofa.com, www.sankofa.com. The problem that we're facing now is, of course, it's not cheap to modernize and digitize and get them streaming. But we're working on getting our films, digitized and streamable. So most of the ones you'll find there are DVD, which are totally valid ways to get them and watch them. But many are now out of print and DVD as we push to, kind of. So we're doing a little fundraising. We'll be doing, pretty soon. But if you go and sign up to our mailing list, you'll be kept up to date to all those things. But yeah, sankofa.com.
Sankofa.com. Great, great.
SANKOFA. Sorry, Sankofa.
So are you working on any projects right now that you can talk about?
I have a couple of things. First, my middle name is Sankara. I was named after Thomas Sankara. He was a revolutionary president of Burkina Faso in the 80s. And unfortunately, he was assassinated by his right-hand man, kind of at the behest of the French government, as usually, because he was doing too much good. But my parents they were really caught up in that whole movement. They went because he invited filmmakers from the whole diaspora, African diaspora, and he was really about, Pan-Africanism. And they were back and forth to Burkina Faso through the 80s. They started a documentary on him, interviewed him and many people around him. But of course, when he was killed, they stopped going and it kind of fell to the wayside. But he was killed in 87. I was born in 88. They named me after him. And so like now, 30 some years later, I'm kind of, picking the project back up. So I was there in 2019 interviewing people, and that's a documentary that I'm working on, concrete project. Other than that, I'm doing a lot more reading than I've been doing writing, especially throughout this whole uprising period. Just kind of trying to refocus and not jump too quickly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Merawi. It's really such an honor to show your film and to get an opportunity to chat with you. And best of luck with your future projects, and please keep in touch.
Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure. I ride for y'all, because y'all have been riding for me from the get-go, the whole Slam Dance team, and I see Mammoth Lakes as an extension of that. And you know, anything y'all need, I'm here for it. And yeah, I'm always support.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
All right, y'all take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye bye.